I believe one of the reasons we're struggling with mental health, the way we're struggling with mental health as a society, is because so many people are disconnected from their purpose. Purpose brings peace. I remember 2020 happened. You know the reason I could support you all through 2020 is because I had peace. If I didn't have peace, human beings are really good at identifying frauds. You'd have been like, this guy trying to tell us to be calm and he ain't calm. This guy's trying to tell us to stand still and he ain't still. Like you would know, you go, this is nah. But the reason I was able was because I knew that I was aligned with my life's purpose. So whatever's happening, however the wind is blowing, I am anchored. And so no matter what's happening on the boat, on the ship, how it's tossing on the sea, I'm anchored. And all I can tell you to do is get anchored too. Get anchored too. Because the wind can blow, the waves can push, but I ain't going nowhere. I'm good. I'm taken care of because I'm aligned with my purpose. And if it's my time to go, it's my time. Whether I'm in Africa, whether I'm in South America, whether I'm in Asia, like you ain't afraid to go there. It doesn't matter because if it's my time, if my purpose is complete, it's complete even if I'm in Chicago. So guess what? I'm going to go where I need to go. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm going to be who I'm supposed to be because it don't make sense to be scared.
Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibilities. Find your power, passion, and purpose. You know it's time for you to walk in greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out your dreams. Right now. Inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live your dream. Your purpose now. Inspirational perspective. Let's slay your goals.
When I was a little boy, I was having this conversation with my son. Because, now with, I talk about this a lot, like how entertainment is so accessible. And so even yesterday, we were headed to my sister's wedding. She got married yesterday, so congratulations to my sister and her new husband. He was like, he was having this conversation with my wife and I, his mother, and he was telling her, like, hey, I haven't had that much screen time this week, so I should get some screen time. And I'm like, I don't know if that argument works, man. He was like, no, like I really haven't, and part of the reasons he was been hanging out with me, and I'm just like, nah, right, and. So he was like making this argument for screen time. And I was like, man, do you realize that when I was a little boy, and by the way, I hated that statement when I was growing up. But here I am saying it to my son. Do you realize when I was a little boy that there were no screens? Like, and then in my household, we didn't own a television, which was purposeful. It wasn't an economic thing. It was purposeful. My parents didn't own a television. And so for me, like my entertainment came from reading, which if you ever wonder why I am the way I am, that you might be like, oh, this is why this guy is this way, right? It's like, because reading is like, that was the go-to, right? So even as a child, I learned that if you want to entertain your mind, you want to, if you're bored, Now, by the way, I heard that a lot this week from my son. I'm bored, Daddy. I'm like, well, that's what happens, I guess, when you're hanging out with your father, right? Like, but I'm like, hey, go read a book, right? That's what I heard. Go read a book. So growing up, man, like this was definitely my reality, and one of the things that books did for me was it expanded my knowledge of the world. And it gave me this very deep desire to travel. So again, if you wonder, like, why does Linnell travel the way that he does? This is a seed that was planted all those years ago. And, I would read encyclopedia. I mean, it was encyclopedias. There was nothing else to do, right? Like, I don't even think my son knows what an encyclopedia is, right? Because who needs them? Like when he needs information, he walks into the kitchen, he goes, hey, Alexa, right? And what we're working on is ensuring that he knows Alexa is not the gospel truth. Because he'd be like, that's what Alexa said. It's like, hey, man, Alexa don't know everything, okay? She's reading off information from some database. Like, let's be clear, all right? By the way, I think sometimes we got to remind ourselves of that. So anyway, I grew up and I would look at these encyclopedias and I would see these pictures of, what people were doing in different countries, and then I would kind of just follow. And it gave me this deep desire to travel. And I can remember the first time I was going to take my first international trip alone, like without my parents, without anybody, okay? And what happened is other people began to put their fears for me on me, right? Hold on, man. You gonna go to Europe? Like, because the first time I left, the first time I left the country, was it? I was alone, nobody. Because I'd gone to Mexico with my brother and some friends and things like that. But I was about, at this point, 24, 25, and I took this trip to Europe. I went London, so Great Britain. I hit London. From London, I flew to Munich, I believe, and then spent some time in Munich, Germany. From Munich to Frankfurt, Germany, where I met a buddy. But I believe I met him in Munich. Met a buddy who was serving in the army at the time. Met up with him in Munich, went down to Frankfurt. From Frankfurt to Venice. From Venice down to Florence, Milan, Rome, and then I flew back home. But imagine, if you're a parent right now, imagine you're 25. Ade, you're what? You're 28. Right, if you went and told your parents, like, yeah, this summer I'm going to go to Europe by myself, like, what would they say? Like, turn on Ade's mic. Like, what, and maybe it's not your parents, but what do you think the people around you would say? If you're like, yeah, I'm going to do this by myself. Like, what are the fears that you already know? And the worries, because what happens is people, they transfer their worries onto you as well. And they transfer their anxieties about, like, what they're going to feel when you're gone. They transfer their anxieties onto you, too. What do you think they would be saying?
They would definitely say be safe, do your research, especially for people like me going over there.
What do you mean people like you? What does that
mean?
People.
Doing solo trips.
Like black people? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I think those would be the main things. I mean, other things would be like, watch what you eat. Or research about the food there as well.
Got you.
But yeah, that'll be the main.
So how would that impact you? Like, how would that impact your thoughts about your trip? These concerns that people have.
Definitely put more, worry, like you mentioned on my trip, like as far as
more worry.
The potential dangers, and just other negative things that could happen, either on the way there or being there, or on the way back. So
got it.
Keeping me aware. Yeah.
Got it. Now, here's the interesting thing about the concerns of other people, right? Sometimes they can actually call out something that you're like, ooh, I hadn't thought of that. I should consider that. But most of the time, what happens is when you allow other people's concerns, worries, and anxieties and fears to really enter your space, then you get arrested. And you sometimes fall prey to exactly what it is they were worried about. Let me give you an example of what I mean. There's a story about a man, and he's out in the wilderness with a group of other people, and he takes out his hunting knife, and he's cutting an apple. And he's eating the apple with his hunting knife. And one of his partners says to him, hey, man, be careful. The knife is sharp. Right? Now, is that new news? Did this man, when he pulled out his knife, not know that it, like, and then what is a knife supposed to be? A knife is supposed to be sharp, right? And so if you put cutting myself in my space, does it increase the likelihood that I cut myself, or does it decrease the likelihood that I cut myself? Like, I mean, the knife is sharp. I'm a grown man. I got a knife. I got an apple. I'm cutting the apple. And they're like, hey, man, be careful. You don't want to cut yourself with that knife. Does it increase the chances that I cut myself, or does it decrease the chances that I cut myself? Like, there's no way to really tell, right? So what does it come down to? Me. It comes down to me and how I allow that information to impact me vibrationally. As we talk about this whole notion of how we overcome fear and anxiety, one of the things that I really want us to get, one of the things I really want us to understand is that a lot of what we experience is what we accept. Because as I use this very sharp knife to cut my apple, if I accept that I can potentially cut myself, which, by the way, is always there, the likelihood that I cut myself goes up. Right? But if I say, man, I appreciate that, but this is what I do, the likelihood that I cut myself goes down. And I'm sharing this because I believe that we live in a world where almost any and everything that you aspire to do, there's someone saying, be careful, something bad can happen. Something bad can happen. And we say this around the things that statistically don't really matter. Like I've said it before, like, people know that I gorilla trek, I scuba dive, I skydive. I mean, I do all these different things, right? And then almost every time, Linnell, be careful, right? And I have to tell myself, I appreciate it, and I know what I'm doing. Okay? But nobody says when I get behind the wheel of the car, or when they call me and I say, hey, I'm just headed so-and-so, so-and-so place. Oh my goodness, be careful. You're driving. That's a very dangerous activity. Right? Like, no one says that. But if I say, I'm going to start a new business, be careful. People are not doing well in that business. And I find that interesting. And I also believe that one of the reasons we have to grapple with the level of fear, worry, and anxiety that we're dealing with today has a lot to do with the external environment. So let's start off like talking about the nature of fear. Fear is at the very center of your comfort zone. And because fear is at the very center of your comfort zone, whenever you are looking to introduce change or transformation or something new and unknown into your life, it will activate. It will activate. I was at the dentist, and my dental hygienist, who's been, it's probably been a decade. She's a listener, and she was like, Linnell, I need you to talk about fear and anxiety. Like I really, and then she was sharing with me an example of what was going on for her that I'm not going to get into. But she was sharing it because, like, there was an opportunity that required her to leave her comfort zone. And what I think many of us don't realize is that the way the comfort zone works is it does everything to keep us doing what is quote unquote normal. Normal. So when you think about, and here's the crazy part, because that normal is the same mundane routine that you resent sometimes. That same routine where you're like, oh, that's all right, let me get this started. But see, notice that when you're in that routine, there's no fear. Typically, there's not a lot of worry. You don't worry about your performance. And there's no anxiety, which, by the way, is why you're married to the routine. So the routine you resent, I guess it works like this in marriage too. Like the spouse you resent, you won't leave because it's comfortable, right? Which, how do we begin to tackle the resentment? And we resent it because we feel trapped. And we feel trapped not because of the situation, or in the case of a marriage, not because of the spouse. It's us and our refusal to actually allow the impact, because there's an impact of, like, fear has an impact, right? The impact of fear or the impact of worry or the impact of anxiety into our lives. We're doing everything to keep it at bay, but then we resent the reality that it creates. This is interesting. It's an interesting conundrum. Like, let me check in, those of you on Facebook watching, those of you on YouTube watching. Like, am I off here? I don't know. I'm looking at you all day. Like, am I tripping? So then, in some ways, fear, worry, and anxiety keeps us in a loop. And then we resent the loop. So then, not only how do we overcome fear, worry, and anxiety, but how do we break the loop? I'm almost certain that everyone listening to me, you have some type of aspiration that you've had for years that continues to elude you. And the reason that it eludes you is because whenever you begin to even think about taking action, it activates the comfort zone. It begins to move you to the edge of your comfort zone. And the vibration that it creates disturbs you so much that you cut the activity. And one of the things that happens is that many of us will feel this anxiety and feel this fear in a physiological way. Like your heart rate increases. Because this is what happens. Your heart rate increases. You might even start sweating. Just the thought of it. Just the thought. Like you start sweating. your breath rate increases. You're like, whew. Some of you start to call on the Creator and His Son. And nothing's happened. You just had a thought. But the thought is so visceral that the idea of taking action on a thought feels almost impossible. And what I want us to really get is that this is all just in your thinking. So then if it's all just in the thinking, then it means that part of what we have to investigate, if we're going to really begin to tackle how we break free from fear, worry, and anxiety, is the mind. Let me give you an example because we're talking about boundaries here, right? And these boundaries are mental boundaries that we begin to draw almost as physical lines. Here's an example. I can remember some years ago, I used to volunteer at a school over in Lawndale. And I was talking to some of the young people, and I found out that a lot of them hadn't seen Lake Michigan. Now, our day's face was like, whoa, right? Whoa. And I want to put this in context, right? Because for anyone who just thought, wow, consider that for someone who's done the thing that you're afraid of, if you said, yeah, I've been wanting to do this, but I'm scared, that's exactly what their response would be. They'd be like, wow. Why? Because they've been there. Because they've done it. And so in context, when I talk about low-income children in a really bad neighborhood that haven't seen Lake Michigan, and they're literally minutes away, like literally minutes away, it becomes difficult to comprehend. Well, why wouldn't they just go to Lake Michigan? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One, like you would just get in your vehicle, right? The same way a wealthy person be like, you're scared to start a business? You know, like you get where I'm going? They have so many tools that allow them to start a business that they can't understand why you would have barriers to starting yours. The same way we can't understand why some young people, but then we begin to break it down. What is it that a low-income child from North Lawndale has to overcome to get to Lake Michigan? Well, first, they don't have a car, right? Second, in order to get to the lake, they have to take public transportation, which means that they would have to walk to the bus stop, which, by the way, crosses gang lines, right? And if they cross those gang lines, the fear, the worry, the anxiety of what could happen to them, or even what their parents tell them that would happen to them, becomes very real. And I'm using this example because I really want us to understand in many ways why we don't do what we do, by identifying why they don't do something that we see is very simple. So if I cross that street, I can get jumped on. And the only way for me to get to the lake is I have to cross that street to get to the bus. And then, by the way, when I get to the bus, I got to wait on the bus. And God knows the bus can't come fast enough, because if somebody sees me on that bus stop, that could be a fight. You follow? And so this is the reason why many of them haven't been to Lake Michigan. Now it begins to make sense. It's like, oh. How we get them to Lake Michigan is we provide them support. Transportation support. We find someone who has the wherewithal to get to Lake Michigan, and maybe they can take us. You see where I'm going with this? Like, one of the ways that we overcome the fear, anxiety, and worry that we have is by finding people who've done the things that we want to do and gaining support from them to get it done. Like that's like in terms of number one, in terms of how to break free from fear. And by the way, all the fears are going to be there. Like if you take a child and like, will somebody see me in the car? Will they see us in the car? Will something happen while we're driving down the street? Like all those fears will be there. We know that drops it significantly, right? But all the fears will be there the same way. You're like, well, will this person whose car I get in really take me to the lake? So what happens is, even when we get support, then the fear, worry, and anxiety shift. And it goes to the next thing. And it goes to the next thing. And it goes to the next thing. So even if I provide the antidote of support, there's still something to overcome here. So then how do we get past that? I can remember years ago, some of the fears, anxieties. I was talking about the travel. And believe me, people put a lot, oh, now you're a black man in these white countries and that. And then what I experienced was quite the opposite. That we were taking our experience of European ancestors here in the States and actually projecting it onto Europe. And then when I got to Europe, I found that being a young black man wasn't half as bad there as it was here. It's interesting, right? And anybody who's been there, you get it. Like, it's like, I remember being in Italy, walking into a little deli. And the gentleman met me at the door. Like, I was starting to opened the door for me, ran to the table, pulled out my chair, like, bonjour, how are you? How are you? I'm like, what? What is happening? Like this, if I walked into an establishment on the north side, it would never happen, right? So all the fears, worries, and anxieties that people have typically are contextually based in their experiences. When you look at the research on what causes fear and anxiety, what you begin to find is that the research shows that fear significantly impacts our decision-making abilities. And so what fear does is it freezes us. It freezes us cognitively and it freezes us physically. So then when I'm experiencing high levels of fear, if I'm not practiced at it, I want to get here too. Like, I really want us to understand why we should be afraid most of the time. Because when I'm not used to being scared, when I stay in a bubble, what happens is I have a very difficult time making decisions. Like, my decision-making ability drops significantly. And then I actually have proof that I shouldn't do what I'm afraid of. Not only does it freeze me cognitively, it freezes me physically. And then once I have that experience, and of course an experience without support, that's why I think like having somebody there with you who pushes you is so powerful. Because then they get to support you in the decision making. They get to support you, and when you get frozen physically, like they actually push you, like, hey, come on, let's go, right? And you see that what you were afraid of, the interpretation of all the things that could happen aren't necessarily true. For instance, this is one of the reasons, like if you go on any tour with me, there's always something that I introduce that creates fear in the traveler on purpose. That's safe, by the way, right? I haven't come back without a traveler yet, right? And that you would think that's evidence enough for people to be like, man, okay, Linnell's gone gorilla trekking. How many times? He always comes back. Right? Like 2 plus 2 equals 4. Fear doesn't work that way, though. Right? Fear doesn't say, oh, man, 2 plus 2 equals, like, he always comes back, which means I could do it too. It doesn't work that way. Right? It's just you feel the physiological, oh, my God, I would die. Right? And then it's like we make a decision that we believe is rational, but it's actually irrational. Because the rational decision would say, if Linnell's gone gorilla trekking 4 or 5 times and he always comes back, I probably could go gorilla trekking with him too and come back. But that's not how fear works. Like it freezes your decision-making ability. And I'm using these examples, hopefully, so that you can look at what you're afraid of in your life, like what's been freezing you, to really begin to understand how irrational fear can be. Oh, my goodness, I would never, ever, ever do that. In 2019, I took a group of women to Ghana. I didn't know it was going to be a group of women. It turned out to be all women. My wife decided to go on this trip too, it was absolutely amazing because then she was, a part, with these women. And the part of the trip where, because I got folks going, we just had our Q&A call yesterday. I don't want to get into it. Like, because then folks be like, I'm not doing that. That's what happens. They be like, oh, that's what you do it? Oh, I'm not doing that. Right? By the way, everybody's come back. So this group of women, the place where we begin to, it literally is overcome your fears, like the part of this trip. And in the workbook, in the journal, like it says, what was it like to overcome your fears, like when they get back? And this group of women, what they end up doing as they were going through this challenge is they began singing. And as they sang, I remember watching this happen. Like the leader of the group who decided, she was going to go first, she began singing. They were chanting behind, they were singing behind her. She was saying, and they would sing behind her. And I saw these women actually conquer something that they believed they couldn't conquer through song. And what it revealed to me is the power of the frequency of music to overcome fear. So when you think about the second way that we can break free of fear, anxiety, and worry is music. Like music has this spiritual quality. There's been research done that actually, and I actually use it on myself, that actually shares how music comes at different frequencies. I've talked about this before. As a matter of fact, this is, if you wonder why our community is in the shape it's in, just go to the music. Like the frequency of that music evokes violence because that's the frequency of the music. The same way there's other music that can bring peace. There's other music that can bring euphoria and feelings of romance. That's why, sisters, if you walk into a man's house and he's playing slow music, you be like, no, turn that off now. Turn that off. Why? Because you know that if you sit in that house while that man is playing that slow music, that frequency will eventually begin to shift the vibration. You could walk in saying, this guy has no chance. You could be on the phone with your girlfriend like, yeah, girl, I'm going, he cooking me dinner. Ain't nothing going to happen. Right? And then you walk in at slow music. You know right away, if you intend for that to stay true, the music's got to stop. And if you let that music keep going, it will shift the frequency of your body and your decision-making ability. This is the power of music, right? So then how do we use this to overcome fear? How, like, and in some of this, I know some people are like, oh my goodness, like it clicks, right? Somebody else is like, that's why that went down? That's why I got weak? Yes. The frequency of music. If somebody's like when folks say I'm fearless, I'm like, yeah, all right. I'm fearless. It's like, okay. Translation, I'm stupid because I don't know when to be afraid. Like, I'm just like, nah, nobody's fearless. Like, say you're courageous. I'm courageous. I walk straight forward in the face of fear. But nobody's fearless. We all feel some level of fear because there's some boundary, there's some invisible boundary right now that is holding you back from doing something you know you should do. And typically that aligns itself with some level of anxiety, some level of worry, and some level of fear. Another way to say it is somebody says, I'm fearless, be like, you're unaware. Oh, no, you're just telling me you're unaware of what's really going on for you. So maybe not stupid, but unaware. You lack awareness. And so for most of us who have some level of awareness, like we know when we're feeling, these sensations of fear. Here's the other thing about fear. Fear is predictable. And so I think we have to learn how to anticipate it. Like, I know if I'm going to do something I've never done before, that fear is going to show up. I've led tours with folks, they like, I'm not afraid of this. And then they get to the actual thing and the fear shows up in some capacity. I'm like, oh, okay, that's how your fear showing. I'm not afraid. It's like, well, does this normally happen to you? It's like you have to know that if you're doing something new, that fear will predictably show up even if you don't think you're afraid. I'll give you an example. I remember the very first time I went gorilla trekking. Like, and I admit to being the average man when it comes to how I think about my abilities. Okay. It's like, oh, gorillas are cool. I read up on it. I watched the documentary. You know what I'm saying? Like, and this is what I do. Like, I use my, I'll use my intellect and common sense. And I'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is nothing, right? And so I remember preparing for the trip, packed, flew over. The first time I did this, I was in Rwanda. I flew to Rwanda. We did some safari stuff before that. And then we went to the volcano mountains, stayed in this cabin. I think it got real the night before when I didn't have hot water. And I was like, I had to take a cold shower. And I'm like, man, you out here now. You know what I'm saying? You out here. It was like, you trekking tomorrow, like with gorillas. And I could feel it start to kind of come up a little bit in my physiology. Like I was, that cold shower, like it woke me up. Like, hey, bro, you about to do something different. And so I went to bed that night. The next morning I woke up. My breathing was different. Taking deep breaths while I was eating breakfast that morning. And this is what men do. I was with my partner. We traveling together. And I look at him. I said, you good? And I check in on him. And he's like, yeah, I'm good. And he's like, you good? Yeah, I'm good. We both breathing funny. So anyway, we get to where we get our briefing for the gorillas. And they're giving us the briefing. And so you see other people, and it begins to know, oh, okay, I'm not the only crazy one. There's other crazy people here too, right? And this is what I mean by support. When you're going to do something that you're afraid of, it's always nice to be doing it with other people. All right? It's always nice to be, oh, okay, I'm not alone in this. And so I remember like, it was a group of folks, you're looking around, like, all right, you already know, most of them are white. Right? So sometimes that doesn't make you feel better. But then I'm like, I'm in an African country, and the Rangers they look like me, so we're going to be all right, right? Because, sometimes our white cousins, they do things where you're like, you shouldn't do that. You know, you shouldn't. Like, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't. No, you shouldn't do that. That's dangerous, right? It's like, you shouldn't do that. All right, so anyway, but guerrilla trekking is different, right? So it's like, it's okay. So I remember we're trekking through the jungle. And, like, it starts to get real, man. Like, you know, the guide is, like, literally, like, using the machete to cut open the path. And we're walking through. And then we got to this opening. And we saw a few other rangers. And the guy looks back and like, we're here. And just those words, my heart started racing. I'm like, and I ain't see a gorilla yet. But my heart starts racing. I'm like, oh, man, okay. Like, he done did it now. Can't run back. And then the ranger grabs my arm and says, stop. I look at him, and he's tense. Now I'm tense. And then we see the thicket in front of us moving. Like, there's a big old, like, lot of, like, this grass that's super tall. You can't see what's on the other side, but it's shaking now. And my heart starts going, man. Boom, 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 boom. And then out of that thicket walks this silverback, man. I mean, it is massive. And I thought I was the man, right? Boy, when I say my heart started beating out my chest, I saw this animal. I said, Linnell, what are you doing here? Right? What are you? And he walks out the thicket. He looks at us, and he kind of turns the corner and walks away. And then, you know, I begin to calm, and I realized, like, man, this is about to be one of the most amazing experiences. But in order for me to have that amazing experience, I had to overcome the physiological response that happens when you do something that's unknown. It was my first time. The rest of the experience was absolutely spiritual. And that's why I continue to go back, and that's why I take people now. And the reason I take leaders in particular is because as leaders, in order for us to lead powerfully, we have to be willing to step out into the unknown. That's what leaders do. And if I can't step into the unknown that is statistically safe as a leader, how am I going to lead my team into the unknown that has uncertainty? And that's why we do this tour. By the way, if you're interested in it, got the 2025 days set. You can go to linnellharris.com/Uganda 2025. Uganda. But I remember that experience. And you would think, as much as I know about the predictability of fear, that I anticipated the fear. And this is one of the things I really love about women, like their ability to say, I'm scared. You know, men, we don't. I had a few men who had signed up for the 2024 trip, and they all had, well, my schedule, like they were in, right? They were in, I'm going to do this, man. You know, I'm going to do this. I said, all right, you good with this? I'm good with this. I like this. And then we got closer. Linnell, so what's going on with my schedule right now? I know I had made the verbal commitment, but as I look, I don't know how. It's like, okay, it's all right. You're scared, man. I get it. No. Like, man, we don't like, you know. And I know this from being a coach. Like, we do not. It takes me. I can have a woman who at the beginning of the session is like, Linnell, I'm afraid of X, Y, and Z. Can I get coaching support on this? A man would come and be like, I don't understand why this is not happening for me. And then, 50 minutes later, be like, oh, you scared. They're like, oh, my goodness. Oh, I guess this is confidential, right? Like, yeah, it's confidential. They don't know. Nah, don't tell nobody I'm afraid. We all have unlimited potential. Like when you think about where you can go, like what you can create in your life, like I believe that is absolutely limitless. And the only thing that limits it is the interpretations that we have of what we cannot do and what might happen, which is fear, which is worry, and which typically is an anxiety. And anxiety, by the way, in those of us that are healthy, you've heard me say this before, is a lack of clarity. So when I'm anxious, there's just a lack of clarity. So I'm anxious about what's going to happen in my business. There's a lack of clarity. I'm anxious about what's going to happen in my marriage. There's a lack of clarity. I'm anxious about my health. There's a lack of clarity. Linnell, I'm anxious about my finances. There's a lack of clarity. And what happens, this is how anxiety and fear marry one another. What happens is the anxiety I feel then produces a fear that keeps me from gaining clarity. So if let's use financial anxiety, for example, right? So I have financial anxiety. It's like, well, if you have financial anxiety, you should get clear on your finances. But then it's like, wow, but if I get clear, then I'll actually know. And I'm afraid of knowing. I'm afraid of knowing how much debt I'm in. I'm afraid of knowing how short I'm coming up every week and what the actual cost of my current lifestyle is. I'm afraid of knowing that. I would rather remain in the financial unknown than to know. So then what it does is it puts me in this loop where I live that way year after year after year. And this is one of the ways we literally kill ourselves, because anxiety produces stress. So now I got financial stress, I got financial anxiety. And the reason I have this is because I'm allowing my financial fear to keep me in the clouds. So then, how does one overcome this? How do you get out the loop? I believe that this is the role of purpose. I believe this is the reason the Creator instilled in us a purpose, because He knew that we would encounter things that without an anchor, we would not know how to overcome. I firmly believe that. And so the fourth thing that I would say supports us in breaking free, by the way, this is not in rank of importance and priority, because you already know what I think about purpose. But the fourth thing that supports us in breaking free of fear, worry, and anxiety is a deep sense of purpose. See, what purpose does is it gives you a why that is bigger than you. And so if I intend to live out my purpose, that means I have to get out this financial loop. You get where I'm going? And I use that as the anchor to take on the courage necessary to find out what's going on. And believe me, I know how this works because I've been there. I know how it works to have a stack of bills on the counter that are still in the envelope because you're afraid to open them. I know what that feels like. And you're looking at it. And then the stack gets bigger. And now you know it's worse because you got late penalties. And you decide I'm going to ignore it. But then the anxiety kicks in because now you're not clear on how bad it is. So now you feel anxious. And so because you feel anxious, you go in the refrigerator and grab a beer. Before you know it, you've had 6. You're and by the way, I know how this goes. And the beer sometimes ain't strong enough. So you go in the cabinet. And we typically, what we do to anxiety is we drown it. And that's how we've been coping with it. The problem is you're going to come up for air. You always do. Like the buzz only lasts for so long. You wake up the next morning, there it is. Or you might even make it past, you might even make it past the bedroom and the bathroom and the kitchen, and then you get to the kitchen counter and there's all your anxiety sitting there. Oh, I got to deal with this. Friend calls and say, we're having a Memorial Day barbecue this afternoon. You think, thank God. Something that will take my mind off my anxieties, my worries, and my fears. You ever wonder why people get to a party and it looked like they really needed it? Because they did. Because they do. Like, hey, cuz, what the drinks at? They like, I need to get into this party as quickly as possible so I can drown out my anxiety and fear. The problem is Tuesday morning's coming. The problem is Tuesday night is coming. Tuesday night, ain't nothing good on TV, I don't think. I mean, I think they probably got some good stuff. They're doing a good job. And that's one of the other reasons why we put so much time into television. Because it gives me, like human beings, we love stories. And so the stories actually take me to another place. I get to have a different experience. I get to experience the stories that they're telling me. I get to laugh with the sitcoms and avoid my anxiety. What purpose does, it actually supports us in gaining clarity on what life looks like from that place. So number 5 is vision. See, if stories work, I really want you to hear this. If stories work with allowing us to escape our fear, anxieties, and worry, then what if you created a story for your future? So instead of using the artificial stories of sitcoms and movies and things like that, but by the way, we forget almost as soon as we see it, right? My wife was watching the Bridgertons last night, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, we watched this? I don't even remember. Like, I guess the guys were fighting in one scene. I said, they fought each other? You would think I would remember that. I don't remember it, right? Because those stories are inconsequential. Like they're there for entertainment in the moment. But the beauty of vision, the beauty of creating a vision is that that's a story that you can actually create and live. And that story takes you outside the context of fear, worry, and anxiety. And if that vision is connected to your purpose, because remember, purpose is the anchor. And if that vision is connected to your purpose, it actually gives you an anchor to begin to take on the things that scare you most. That's how you gain the courage to open that pile of bills, to get clear on how bad it is. Because if I'm going to be financially free in the next 3 years, I need to understand my financial circumstance right now. Like, so the vision actually says, all right, it's time to do it. It's time to actually, and by the way, like I'm sure as you open the envelopes and you look at it, like sweat, physiological responses, you're putting the numbers in the spreadsheet. Goodness. And then what happens is judgment. So now you start saying to yourself, how could you do this? How could you let it get this bad? And what I want to tell you right now is suspend the judgment. Like, what sense does it make? I just told you how you let it get this bad. You were being human. You were doing what humans do, and you're not the only one that did it. You're not the only one that's doing it, and you're not the only one that's done it. I've been there. So what happens is, and by the way, condemnation separates us from the vision. Like, because now it's like, how could I do this? We get real nasty with ourselves. Like, we say things to ourselves, it's absolutely vicious. And if somebody said it out loud to us, we'd be ready to fight. Like, you're irresponsible, and we do this. And I'm calling it out because it's one of the tactics that anxiety and worry use to start the cycle over again. But instead, if you go, you know what? I forgive myself. I got caught in the loop. I got caught in a human loop. And what's important now is I have a new story. I have a new story that takes me beyond the things that I was afraid of. I have a new story that actually supports me in navigating this new unknown and this uncertainty. I don't know how it's going to go, but I got 3 years. In the next 1,000 or so days, I can completely turn my life around. And if you can stay there and then get curious about what had me kick the can. Like I always tell my clients, like when you notice judgment, go to curiosity. Like instead of saying, oh, I can't believe you did this. You're like, no. Why did I do it? What made me keep that stack of bills on the counter for 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, 3 weeks? What set me up where I'm paying late fees on things that if I had just handled it? Like, get curious. Because in that curiosity, you begin to better understand you. You begin to better understand how you deal with fear, how you deal with worry, how you deal with anxiety. And the more you know yourself, the better you can get in front of it in the future. Transforming fear into motivation. There's something, so the Creator in all his wisdom knew that when he gave us a purpose, like each and every one of us has a purpose for why we're here. And when we use that purpose as an anchor, what it does is it begins to change your relationship to fear. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean. Now, and let me say this. In order for this next step to work, you have to be a believer. And let me tell you what I mean by believer. Because some folks think they believe. Like, are you saying believe in God? Belief in the Creator? Oh, yes, that's me. Absolutely. That's me. Oh, okay. Are you willing to test it? See, that's the thing right there. See, because it's easy to believe in something from afar that you're not going to activate. And I don't really think that's belief. You're telling yourself a story. Like you're telling yourself like, oh, no, I believe. And it's like, no, you don't. Because if you believe, if you really, and let me tell you what I mean by this. If you really believe that the Creator crafted you with a purpose, and that is why you are here, then you would leap. Because his promise wouldn't allow you to fail. Of course, if you keep your commitments, he keeps his. So as long as I'm taking action, as long as I'm in integrity, he has to keep his word. That's belief. That is belief. And so when I'm connected to my purpose, and by the way, here's what happens for a lot of us. we'll get connected to the purpose, and then we'll start to question it. Well, maybe that's not what he wants me to do. So then if I leap and that's not what he wants me to do, then I'll fail. Now, I know somebody's thinking that right now, like, Linnell, I'm with you, but I don't know. I'm not sure. And it's like, this is where you have to know when something's confirmed inside of you. There are folks who will sit up and get to a point where they're like, I know he's cheating on me. But you can't feel the same kind of confirmation in your purpose. I know that's not a good person, but you can't feel like the same thing you feel inside of you that tells you what you know. That's what like you'll feel the same way in your purpose. Conviction. So why would you question the conviction of your purpose, but you don't question the convictions about anything else? This is where, we gotta watch this stuff, man. You know what I mean? Like it's sneaky and subtle and slippery. So when you're anchored to your purpose and you truly believe, then you get to a point where the only thing you should be fearing is fear itself and how it's going to disconnect you from your birthright. By the way, I stole that from Franklin D. Roosevelt. His quote, like, only thing to fear is fear itself. Somebody was like, that's good. And like, I wish it was mine. But so when I know my purpose, the only thing I should be afraid of is the impact of my fear. When I know my purpose, the only thing I should really be afraid of is the impact of my worries. When I know my purpose, the only thing I should be afraid of is the impact of the anxiety. And when I'm afraid of the impact of my fear, my worry, and anxiety, it actually motivates you to move. Because I'm afraid that if I listen to you, you're going to keep me from my promise. And so I have to move. I hope y'all just got that. I hope that just like something just clicked for you. Like, if I'm going to get my promise, then I'm afraid that this feeling I have, this interpretation I have, these worries I have are going to keep me disconnected from what's coming to me. And so because of that, I am motivated to move. Linnell, you moving fast on that. Yeah, I need to. Because I'm afraid of what inaction might do. I'm afraid of what my worries might do. So I'm just going to do it afraid. I'm just going to do it. I'm worried the whole time while I'm doing it, but I'm doing it. And I'm very anxious while I'm doing it, but I can't afford not to. I believe one of the reasons we're struggling with mental health, the way we're struggling with mental health as a society, is because so many people are disconnected from their purpose. Purpose brings peace. I remember 2020 happened. You know the reason I could support you all through 2020 is because I had peace. If I didn't have peace, human beings are really good at identifying frauds. You would have been like, this guy trying to tell us to be calm and he ain't calm. This guy's trying to tell us to stand still and he ain't still. Like you would know, you go, this is nah. But the reason I was able was because I knew that I was aligned with my life's purpose. So whatever's happening, however the wind is blowing, I am anchored. And so no matter what's happening on the boat, on the ship, how it's tossing on the sea, I'm anchored. And all I can tell you to do is get anchored too. Get anchored too. Because the wind can blow, The waves can push, but I ain't going nowhere. I'm good. I'm taken care of because I'm aligned with my purpose. And if it's my time to go, it's my time. Whether I'm in Africa, whether I'm in South America, whether I'm in Asia, like you ain't afraid to go there. It doesn't matter because if it's my time, if my purpose is complete, it's complete even if I'm in Chicago. So guess what? I'm going to go where I need to go. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm going to be who I'm supposed to be because it don't make sense to be scared. And stop. It's all right to be scared. It's not okay to stop. So I'm just going to keep going. And that's the beauty of purpose. I remember 2020 hit. I remember I would go down to my office. I start my mornings with prayer. I had to. Because I would wake up with that feeling. There was no clarity. What's going on? What's going on? I would look at the news lines. You see the death toll climbing. And then they were fear-mongering. Were they fear-mongering, boy? They were fear-mongering. You know, I'm just like, be afraid. Be very afraid. Be afraid in the grocery store. Be afraid outside. It's in the air. I mean, it's in the air. Don't breathe too deep. Might catch it. So I had to get grounded, man. Had to get grounded. And I would pray and I would say, hey, look, man, I don't know what's going on. By the way, this is how I talk. The Creator and I, like, we'd be in these conversations. I don't know what's going on, but you the one that put me right here. You the one that told me to be an entrepreneur. By the way, like revenue just stopped like that, right? You know, all of a sudden, like just a complete drop in revenue. I'm like, hey, I don't like you. You said you would take care of me. You said you would be my source. It's something nice about that when you can just cast all your cares. Like, so I'm gonna need for you to give me that peace that you be talking about, you know, that you promised. I'm gonna need, and then it was like, do what you're supposed to do, and I'll provide the peace. All right, cool. That's the beauty of purpose right there. If you want to know why you can't, like for those of you who don't know your purpose, why it's so tough to get clear. The reason it's tough to get clear because on the other side, there's so much peace that there's parts of your survival mechanism. There's parts of you that don't know how to be with that type of peace, that's scared to actually experience it because it's unknown. Isn't that interesting? What would life be from that place? Clarity. No matter what happens, I have a purpose. You can throw almost any scenario at me. I had somebody say, Linnell, man, what if the United States got taken over and you couldn't do this work anymore? It was like, what do you mean couldn't? It was illegal. Well, it's the only thing I know how to do. That's when it was clear for me, like, oh, I would die for this. If I couldn't use the radio waves, I'd be like, hey, y'all meet me over here. We're going to talk. They come in and arrest me. That's what happens. But that's what I'm going to do. Why? Because that's what gives me peace. And if I'm in a jail cell and there's people to talk to, that's what I'm going to talk to them about. Why? Because that's what gives me peace. Right? That's how simple it is for me. So it could be cold walls, hard floor. I got peace. The beauty of purpose is that it extinguishes fear. Fear is extinguished by purpose. And so it's important for us to not only know our life's purpose, but to live it and act on it. And I believe that the reason why fear, worry, and anxiety are running rampant in our society at a time when we're actually the safest, at a time where we actually have quote unquote modern medicine, although that kind of scares me. I'd rather you give me an herb. You know, you get my point though. At the time where no matter how bad you financially falter, it's almost impossible to fall on your face. Think about that. We got food lines. See, there was a time where if you messed up, you would starve, you and your whole family. There was a time, you get where I'm going? And not just you, but the whole community. If the whole community messed up, everybody would starve together. And it's still happening in different parts of the world. But we're blessed to live in a part of the world where even if you took the leap and you thought you hit the bottom, you didn't really, because you would still have food in your belly and shelter over your head. And we get so afraid. Most of us have insurance policies that we didn't even take out. That's the beauty of the welfare system. That's the beauty of, a lot of these subsidies. And we still won't take a chance. And that's how you know the interpretation of fear, the interpretation of what it is that we worry about is irrational. You go to different parts of the world and people who are poor live in terribly poor conditions. When we were in Uganda, we did the village tour, and there were no floors. They slept on wooden cots, thatched with hay to keep the insects away, because the floor is dirt. Over here, the poorest person has a ceramic tile floor. Oh, my bad. Maybe it's just concrete because the ceramic wasn't laid yet. And I'm saying that to put it in context. In other parts of the world, there might be if you're lucky, a tin metal shanty that you can lay over the top of your hut that keeps the elements out, the rain, the insects. Ain't no air condition. And when you spend time with those people, they're not dealing with the fear, worries, and anxieties that we deal with. And here it is, we have more than what we need, and we are consumed with fear. We are consumed with worry. We're consumed with anxiety, and I believe it's because of the frequencies that we're dialed into. Like maybe if you just turned everything off, you find peace. Maybe you cut the television off, you find peace. Maybe if you turned the radio off, you find peace. Maybe if you turned the podcast off, you find peace. Maybe if you turned off all the information, we got all this information and folks are listening to this and listening to that, and you've got so much information, you're confused. It's one of the reasons years ago, I decided, can't be listening to everybody. Let me identify a virtual mentor every year. Learn from them. Very consistent, clean, and clear. One path. But there's something about the environment we live in today that while we have all these amenities, most of you all listening to me, you're riding on 4 wheels. Well, I need new tires, but you still moving. Okay. You got a roof over your head. Well, I'm with my in-laws. You got a roof over your head. You got a bed to sleep in. You're not sleeping on hay, straw. You got a bed to sleep in. Well, my mattress is old. It's used. You got a bed to sleep in. You got sheets to pull over your body. When you sit down in the morning to use the bathroom, you're on the toilet. You're not squatting on the other side of a hill. I can remember years ago when I lived in India, be on a train early in the morning. You see people lined on the hillside. They didn't mind the train seeing them. You'll never see me again. They'd be on the other side of the hill so their loved ones couldn't see them. All the women down there with the little girls, all the men over there, you're on the train, you just see it. Over here, we got all these amenities, but we're consumed with these fears, these anxieties. I wonder if I went and asked one of these people, maybe I will, and say, would you take what Americans have, the amenities, the luxuries, but instead I would have to give you this injection of fear, this injection of worry, this injection of anxiety, like you couldn't get it unless you were anxious every day. Would you take it or will you stay in this hut? I bet you they say, no, I'll be right here with my family. I'm happy. What is it that you're most afraid of? What interpretation has got you bound, that's running through your mind, that is consuming you, that's keeping you from taking action? The first part is to distinguish it, gain awareness of it. Then ask yourself, if the worst thing happened, the absolute worst thing happened, would you still live? I remember before I left corporate America, my coach asked me a question. He said, Linnell, based on what you saved, if you did absolutely nothing and absolutely nobody hired you, what's the worst thing that could happen? And right away, it kind of took away some of the worry and anxieties I had about leaving. Because I began to realize, like, man, I guess I would go for a couple of years and have to get another job. That's the worst thing. But then we make it so big in our minds. And you know what's even better? Is that I would know that I tried. And that when my time came and I was reflecting on my life, I wouldn't have a regret. I wouldn't say, I wish I took the leap. I wish I had ran straight forward and towards my fears, but I didn't. So now I don't know. And for many of us, we're allowing the fear and the worry and the anxiety to produce what will be our deepest regrets. And you won't remember how scared you were. You won't remember all the things you worried about. You won't remember how the anxiety felt. But what you will remember is that you didn't jump. You didn't jump. So this morning, will you jump? I gave you the tools. I gave you the tools. From music to purpose. I went all the way around. All the ways that you can begin to overcome this. And the question is, will you jump? Corrie ten Boom has a quote. She said, worry does not empty tomorrow of its troubles. It empties today of its strength. It empties today of its strength. Practice moving with strength. Thank you for watching Inspirational Perspective. If you love this show and you want to see more content like this, you can go right here. And if you like this subject and you want to see much more content that we have available for you, just click the button here. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to watch the show live, 7 a.m. every Sunday morning on WBON Radio, or you can catch it right here on YouTube or Facebook.com/Coach Linnell Harris. Be sure to hit that like button if you haven't already.
Be sure to subscribe so we can get more content just like this to you.